I wanted to just talk a little bit about what we're gonna go through the mechanics of making a little what we call pro formas, right? And so, like we talked about last week, the thing is, there's retrospective, which is accounting and all that, and then there's prospective, which is finance. And that's what we're going to be doing, is prospective kind of work, where we're going to be coming up with, and the way that we'll do this is as an income statement. And that's why they call them pro formas. They're in the form of a financial statement, as an income statement. And the three things that come with a income statement, right, are revenues minus expenses equals net income. That's what we're looking at. And when we're talking about a project like what you guys are doing, there's another aspect to this. There's basically three aspects, right? We're going to model our revenues, and we're going to model our expenses, and that'll give us our net income, right? Because it's the difference between the two. And then there's one more thing we have to model, and that is our costs. So we're going to come up with something that's probably going to look like, say, now we're going to call year 0. And then 1, 2, 3, and we can go out further, but just something like that, right? And year 0 is probably going to be, a lot of it's going to be taken up with costs, right? Where we're developing our project. And we may be lucky enough to have some revenues while we're having costs, so that's great. But we're going to have, a lot of you are going to have your development costs in this year, right? So let's just call that DC, development costs. And then you're going to start to transition into revenue, expenses, and net income, right? Into some sort of operations, right? So you're going from a development to ops, pretty much, kind of thing, right? That's going to be the overall scheme of things. And as we're looking at that, let's say once we get past our costs, just graphically, right, we're going to say, okay, here's basically our cost part here, right? This will be year 0, and here's year 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. And so in this year, we're getting all ready, and we're doing all this stuff, and this is just cost money, right? And then we start to have operations. And our operations are going to be, we're going to have some fixed costs, right? And what would fixed costs be like? Fixed costs would be, unless you make them variable, like you rent a time on a canning machine. If you buy a canning machine, that's a fixed cost. If you have a tap room, that would be a fixed cost, right? It doesn't matter if one person comes in or 1 million people come in, you're going to have those costs each month. So what are some fixed costs? Well, your costs are pretty much all variable costs, right? You get a customer, and then you buy the materials, you do the clipping and trimming and all just for that, and deliver them to the thing. But each of those costs are variable. Unless you were a grower or something, I can't think of you having much fixed costs. Maybe your clippers and vases, that kind of stuff. You have some fixed costs, but very little. And that's, you start thinking about your cost structure, right? How much fixed cost relative to how much variable cost? Like a pizzeria or something, right? You got to get the pizza ovens, you got to get the storefront, whatever. Even if nobody buys a pizza, you're carrying that cost. That's a fixed cost. And so then there's the other component of costs is the variable costs, right? And the variable costs are what goes into each actual item. So you look at the, and you could have fixed costs too that might be somebody that runs an office, some administrative folks, or secretaries, advertising, those kind of things might be. Now with online sites, the fixed costs are also really small too. So that's another way to encourage to stay online, right? And you could even do pop-up tap rooms or something, like where you go around and say, and tell everybody, this weekend we're going to be at Balloon Fiesta, and this weekend we're going to be at this, and not have a rent that you're carrying that's dragging down, especially at first. Try to keep all your costs variable, limit your fixed costs, and fixed costs could be cheap, like just a domain name. If a Facebook page is free, think about what are all the free things and exploit those ahead of time. A Twitter account is free. MailChimp is a great way to build up a mailing list for free, up to 2,000. You can have 2,000 people on your MailChimp list, and it's all completely free. So think about those kind of things. What you can do to manage your fixed costs or eliminate fixed costs, and just have variable costs, and try to get customer interactions and try to see what people like about the stuff, how they're using it, why they're using it. There's a great book called Talking to Humans. You can download it. It's free if you just put into Google Talking to Humans. And it's a book on customer discovery and how do you talk to customers about your value proposition and get good feedback from them, feedback that then you can aggregate up into some statistics and some meaningful information about what you're doing right and wrong. And they call that qualitative research, because it's not quantitative necessarily, it's qualitative. You're asking, what do you think about this and that? And they're giving you qualitative, subjective answers, but you want to have the subjectivity in a way that you can actually use it for information. So it's a great book, and again, it's free, so no fixed costs, right? And the guys who wrote it are really smart, and it's really fun too. So you have these costs, right? And what's the other component? So now we broke these costs into those two things, right? Two components, fixed costs and variable costs. Now revenues, right? That's the other component. How do they fit into this kind of picture, right? Well, revenues start at zero, right? This axis is money, this axis is time, right? So it starts at zero, and then revenues, as you sell units, it could be time, or this could be quantity, how many units you're selling. As you go up, here's your revenues, right? So for each sale, obviously, at the end of the day, you want to sell something, you're pricing it, right? You're thinking about pricing, and that's the key for revenues, right, is pricing. What price you're going to sell, and then quantity, how many are you going to sell, right? And what is revenue but price times quantity, right? How many you sell at what price? And that gives you your revenue. So you'll be driving those in your spreadsheet, and you're making estimates about that. So you're going to have to make some decisions about what you think your costs are and what you think your revenues are going to be, and pricing. And so, and you want to sell things for more than it costs you to make them, obviously. Certainly more than the variable costs, right? A lot of times we break these income statements up and we'll say, well, here's our revenues, and then we're going to break our costs into, sometimes it's the variable costs, it's almost like variable costs, but we call it something else. We call it COGS. You ever hear that word? Cost of goods sold, right? That's the variable cost per se, right? They're pretty much the same thing. There's some differences, but so COGS is how much goes into the cost of each actual good, right? And so if you take revenues and you take the cost of goods sold away from it, then you have your operating earnings or operating profit or something. And then you take the fixed costs, or sometimes they call it, sales, general and administrative, stuff like that. You see line items SG&A, but it's really the fixed costs. And then you reduce the fixed costs out, and then you get your net income. And then this gives you two ways to look at, are you at least covering these guys, right? And then you have some kind of contribution margin, is what the cost accountants call it, that's going towards covering your fixed costs. Sooner or later, and then you want to think about, well, if my contribution margin is X and my fixed costs are 100X, then I have to sell 100 units to cover my fixed costs. And then you start thinking about how you're covering this part of your monthly nut or whatever. So now we have these dynamics on a little graph, right? So I'm going to ask you about a couple of points. What is this point here called? Break even. Boom. That's the break-even point. That's where your revenues are covering your costs. And so you want to see, where do you get to break even? And really if you can start talking dynamically about your costs in this way, even if they're just sketched out for next week, you can talk meaningful to people, and they'll think that you're an operator. I have to sell X amount of units to break even. And I've done that because I know what my fixed costs are. I got them here detailed on a spreadsheet. I know what my variable costs are. I got them detailed on a spreadsheet. This is my pricing going to be, and so that's where we're going to cross that line. And then, so then what's this part called?
Profit.
Profit. Bingo. Makes sense? And that's where you want to get, right? You want to be on this side of the break even. And how long does it take you to get there? Right? How long does it take to get there, say in a year, right? If we're talking about a year. Black Friday, right? It's coming up. In fact, Amazon started their early Black Friday November 1st because they're just like relentless, you know. They're not waiting until the day after Thanksgiving or something. They're doing it now and just crushing everybody, right? Poor Sears, poor JCPenney's.
Sears doesn't exist anymore.
The what?
Sears doesn't even exist anymore.
Right, they went bankrupt. They still exist, but not that they're holding on. And if none of these companies can afford a bad 2018, they're just going to be, and that's probably what's going to happen. So, short Sears, long Amazon, right? If you're an investor. Black Friday, what does the term mean?
When you get into the black.
It does, yeah. It's not like Black Friday. It sounds like some kind of dark day, like, you know, like Black Monday. You know, in the stock, Black Monday was the disaster when the stock market crashed and all. Black Friday, what does it mean? Yeah, you know, some kind of sinister satanic thing or something, right? No, that's what it means. That's when retail firms traditionally go from operating in the red, which means operating over here, to operating over here. And that just tells you how skinny their margins are, right? And how risky that business is. They don't cross this break-even threshold into the promised land until the day after Thanksgiving. And then they have like 4 weeks to scramble to squeak out some kind of profit here. Hardly sounds like a good business model to me, right? And it's not. It's incredibly skinny margins. You know, think about that Kmart over on Carlisle. It's closed now, right? How could that even exist? Because you have to fill up that giant parking lot. There's nobody ever there. All that inventory in that giant store, and people come in maybe buy one or two things. You know, how do they make money? It just doesn't make sense. So, retail is really having, you know, challenges now, trying to rethink what they're doing. There's lots of, you know, little artisanal, just like artisanal breweries and coffee shops and kombucha and stuff like that, and what you're doing, Flores, that are capturing small niche markets, and people like to buy local and have interactions. But there's, on the other side, these just like megaliths that are just online that don't have the fixed costs of inventory and bricks and mortar stores and all that, and then they can take those savings and pass it on to everybody else, right? Pass it on to their customers. And you can't compete if you have to cover these kind of costs and the other guy doesn't have these costs. So I think we got a pretty good idea about dynamically about the structure of how this kind of stuff works, right? Questions? Answers? Okay. So we'll leave it at that. And now let's move into making something like that, right? Everybody see that kind of pretty good? Okay. So how are you familiar with Excel? You all pretty much familiar with it? Enough to drive it?
We've gone on a couple dates.
What?
We've been on a couple dates.
Been on a couple days on it?
Dates.
Dates on Excel?
Yeah.
Oh, uh-huh. Well, so if I go too fast, tell me, you know, don't hesitate to shout and just say, hey, what did you do there or something, because this is something to really get familiar with. This is a power tool. It'll help you in everything you do with business. Like we talked last time, you know, business is all about numbers. So the first thing to do is go down in the corner there, right? What you can do is you can make multiple sheets, and we're going to make multiple sheets. But we're going to start with a sheet here. If you double click on that and just type in summary, right?
Summary?
Yeah, and this will be our summary sheet. So the way Excel works, it's a matrix, right? You have your vertical and horizontal columns, and what we're going to do vertically, horizontally is going to be time, and what we're going to do vertically then is going to be these different number things, right? And we're going to create 3 detail sheets that are going to add to our summary sheet, and it's going to be our costs, our revenues, and our expenses. And then you can model these up in any way you want to customize them for your company, right? So this is just a template kind of thing. So what we're going to start with is, and I just move into the middle of the thing a little bit, and I'm going to put a 1 and then an arrow and then a 2, right? If I do that, and then I come back and grab those 2 fields, and then I come down onto this little corner here, and then you get that little square like that. And then if you press down your mouse and then go across, it knows to count up. So that way you can quickly, put in numbers. And these are going to be our years, right? Now, a lot of times, you'll want to do the first year at least in months. And we can do that in our detailed sheets. So I'm just going to call this years. With me so far? Okay. And so I'm going to leave one space there, and then I'm going to put revenues. And I'm going to leave 1 year there too for the costs in year 0. I'm not going to call it year 0 yet, but I can. Expenses, and then what? Net income. And net income is the same as, you can also call that profit, you can call it earnings. So there they are. And then if you come up here, I'm going to move this a little bit over so that it goes to that income is basically, all in there. I just stretched that cell out a little bit so all of them fit in there like that. Now, because we're going to be doing this sort of addition, I'm going to go out like that and right click and go into format cells, right down there. And this comes up, and I'm going to go to border, right? And I'm going to take a nice line, and you can pick out every line. And then over here, I'm just going to put a border on the bottom, and I hit OK. See, then we have a little line like you have when you're adding and subtracting, right? So this is it. I'm just going to call it name of your company, but I'm going to call it XYZ Corp. And then over here, I'm just going to put financial projections. You can call it whatever you want, but something like that, right? Do you all have an electronic logo? You should definitely make an, do you? Yeah. And then you can I would paste my logo in there, just makes it look that much cooler, and then you can start to share this with people. You can then take this, copy this summary sheet just like this, and make it into a JPEG, and then insert it into your PowerPoint or however you want to do it. But this might be the sheet, and then you can even take that bottom line there, the net income, or the 3 lines, the net income, revenue, and expenses, and create a quick graph, and then import that graph into your PowerPoint and show the fancy bars that are going up and how much money you're going to make in the future and all that kind of stuff. But you can just keep it the numbers. Most people understand that. So now let's make. I'm going to make it. Everybody, were you there? Okay. Make another sheet here, right? So I just added a sheet on that thing, and I'm going to call this sheet costs. And this is going to be the project costs, right? So up here I'll put costs. And here I'm going to, again, zoom it in so we can see better here. Just in by half there. And now let's say that, just on average, we're going to say we're going to do a year's worth of costs, right? Because it might take us a year, it might not. So I'm just going to do a couple of numbers like that, and then just grab. If you grab 2 of them, it knows to start counting up.
Is it 12? Oh. 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12? 12?
And then here we'll do year total or just total, whatever you want to say. So at the end there, we'll add up that whole month. So now we can itemize our costs. So maybe what might be some stuff? You know, you might be developing
Variable?
software. What?
Fixed and variable? Or are you breaking those up?
I'm sorry?
Are you doing fixed and variable costs? Or are you
No, I'm just going to make the cost of doing the project.
Okay.
So right now, so it'll be like whatever you have to do to make what you're making your project. Yeah. So no, we won't break it into fixed and variable. On the expense side, you can, but we'll just do it as regular too, and that'll actually be in the expenses. Good question. So what could be some costs? Let's see, equipment. Web development. IT, a truck, storefront, furniture and fixtures and equipment. Could be stuff, lighting, all that kind of stuff if you had a place. So whatever you'd have, what other kind of things would you have? What are some of your costs? Anybody have costs?
buy the tea and the sugar, so our brewery's supply?
Supplies, yep. Because you have to start with some supplies, right? And then you have to keep replenishing those. But you're going to have some supplies. What else do you have? You have some equipment, right? Like some brew vats or that kind of stuff in bottles, all that kind of, a bottle cleaning machine or however you do that. So that would all come under equipment. And so equipment might be, I just have it as one line item, but it might be, 20 or 30 different things. And the more detail, the better. The more detail, the better, because this is where you can list all of your kind of stuff. And you might even have, say, if equipment starts to get to be a big list, have another tab, and then go through and list all your equipment, and just have that be equipment, and list 40 different things on there with a total, and then just pull over that total to this line. So, what you want to try to do is keep things simple and summarize them, and then have as much detail as you can, but have them on separate sheets. So you can just say, well, you want to know about my equipment? Here's my equipment. It's 500 items, because you could, a lot of companies have a lot of different items. But you don't want to put them all here, like list 500 things and then have web development. It just gets too cumbersome. So make lots of different sheets, and then you can pull from one sheet to the other, and I'll show you how to do that. It's very simple. But that makes a very organized spreadsheet document. So this is just for, our kind of, just for examples, right? So once we have all this stuff too, then we want to total it, right? So we're going to have a total down here. So, and then this also gives us our project budget, right? This is our project. We can say, well, in this month we're going to do this. So in 2 months, we want to have our website developed. So that means that, and we're going to do that as one of the first things. And that's going to be $500 in this month and $500 in this month, and then it's going to be up and running. Then we're going to have to buy some, servers or whatever it is, and that's going to be $700 for that. We're going to do that in that month. And then out here, we're going to have to get our truck, and that's going to, cost us, $5,000. And our storefront, we're going to have to, purchase some things for that, and that's going to be, $1,500, whatever. And then we're going to have to get furniture for it and everything. That's going to be $2,500. And then we're going to have to get supplies, and we'll start to get our supplies out here, and it'll take us a couple months, and it's going to be $1,000 in this month, and then $1,000 in this month. And so you start thinking about your project, over time, when you're going to incur these costs based on what you're going to be doing when. And then you're going to have to develop some software. And first you're going to get your website up, say, so that you can see if you can start getting some customer inquiries and things like that. Start lead capturing, building your email list, all that kind of stuff, saying, yeah, are things coming? We'll keep you in touch. Why don't you come in and have some, free samples and tell us what you think, all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm just going to make this 500 and say the software is going to take us, that long to do. And we're going to have some milestones along here that we're going to watch for. We're not going to pay them, our software developers unless they meet these milestones that we had, like a wireframe here and some kind of a beta testing thing here. And then we're going to have to buy some equipment, and we're going to buy that. Once we get our store and all, then we can start putting in some equipment, and that's going to cost us $4,000 here, and then $3,500 here, and whatever your numbers are, right? I'm just coming up with a bunch of numbers. And let's put something in that last month too. So then we're going to buy our countertops and all that stuff, and that's going to come in, and that's going to be another $2,500. So now what do we want to do? Well, now we want to add all those up, right? So I left a space in here, right, between the months and where this goes, and we have this line here. I'm going to do what we did before, right, and just come over here and right-click and go to Format Cells and go to just whatever line that looks nice and border on the bottom. And so now I have a border down there, so you can tell that from the total, right? I'm also going to bold this. Just bold that so that people, so that it stands out a little bit. And maybe make it just a little bit bigger, right? So the total makes sense. Now I'm going to come down here. I want to add up all those different columns, right? Everybody with me? Got it going on? Okay. So what I do is I come over here to this AutoSum. Simplest way, right? If I click on that, it guesses. Now it's only guessing up to there because I don't have anything in those top sections there. But if I grab this, I can bring that up and see that's really where I want it to go up. So it's going to go all those. And then I just hit enter, and it adds up. There's only $500 in that month, right? So now I'm going to come over here, grab that little edge, drag it across, and I'm even going to drag it to the last one there, right? Right now, the year's total is 0 because I don't have anything in that last column. But that gives me all the numbers. See, each one of these is now added up. So I can go over here. If I go here, if I just double click, it shows me what it's doing. It's adding up that column. So I know it's working right now. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over. Oh, I thought I wanted to do something. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to sum again and see if it can guess right. Oh, look at that. It's pretty darn good, huh? I didn't have anything in that first style, so I'm going to pull that back one. And now I'm going to call that good. And now it added up that line, right? So that looks good. Now what do? I just do the same thing down this way. And see now that summation at the bottom says 4,500 because it knows. I'm going to go this way and do all those. And now I know that, oh my gosh, I have to raise 300 grand to make this thing work. Let's put another line there. It was a thinner line, but fine. So have you all done this part at all? Looked at what your costs are? What the heck you want to? You got it?
So would you suggest, so with a tap room, right, that's going to be a big fixed cost. Should I include that in these projections, or should I?
If you're really thinking about doing it, yeah. And what I would do is say you're doing this in a staged way. Say you're first going to, do just the stuff you have to have people come and get your product. Because really that's the key. What you want to do is have folks coming in, trying your product, really liking it, and that way you pick your flavors. Like you said, ginger's very popular. It's like, oh great, we're going to make more ginger. Prune is not that popular, so we're not going to make any more prune. That was a good idea, but it didn't work. Whatever. And then you start to dial in what people like, how they like to get it, how much they consume, all that kind of stuff. And then you have more information. And if people are actually buying it, you have proof. That's the key thing you want to do is get traction with sales. You want to have people actually opening up their pocketbook and giving you money. Because otherwise people are just like, oh, that's the greatest idea ever. Yeah, I'd do that. But when it comes down to doing the $10 subscription, are they really doing it? And so the proof of the pudding is in the taste, right? You actually have to have customers that are buying. And once you have that, then you can ramp it up and you can scale, right? But before that, you want to conserve your money, not spend any money, not say, we're going to go out and make a tap room and it's going to, we're going to model it on, Zendo or whatever kind of thing and make it really cool. And we're going to hire an architect and we're going to spend 50 grand and we're going to make it really beautiful. And then you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs and nobody's coming in because you hadn't, the best thing to do is to get the customers like you have, get their email address, send them an email. Oh, this month we have cranberry or pumpkin because it's Halloween or whatever. Come in, bring in this coupon, we'll give you a 10% off. If you bring in somebody else that bring in a friend for a taste and we'll give you a free quart or whatever to start to cultivate. And then when you open your tap room, it's like we're having our soft opening, everybody come down, it's free stuff for a night, and then they start, getting in, know where it is, and then if you give people stuff for free, then they love to come back, and they have a good feeling. And you want to get them down into your place because it's that hurdle of actually once people are in a place, then they're comfortable to come back, but to get them to come in, and the best way to do it is just give them free stuff. And so you put that in too, though. Free stuff, free supplies and all, that's going to be a cost. That's a marketing cost, but it's a really good one. And you start to say, these are our half a dozen flavors. These are our top 2 sellers. 25% of our people like this month. 20% of our people are power users. They drink 80% of our stuff. You'll start to see that. You'll find power users. Coke has that, where 20% of the people drink Coca-Cola, drink 80% of the Coca-Cola in the world. They call them power users. So you have those kind of people, right? And you want to cultivate those power users, and like, gosh, the people that are drinking so much, not the people that come in, once every 2 months for a quart, but the people that come in every week for a gallon or something like that. They're your real customers. And so you start to cultivate them, and you start to statistically, how many people, what do they like, how often do they do it, and then you start telling that information to, the people that you're presenting to. That's the stuff they want to hear. We have X amount of customers. This amount of them are recurring customers on this basis, and this is how much they consume. And they don't, interestingly enough, some of them are adventurous and they'll try different flavors. Others, they just want their flavor that they like, and I can't get them to switch, and that's fine. So you start giving them a free sample of all these other ones, and maybe that draws them into, how can you expand their palate and whatever, and their consumption. You want them to consume more. You want them to consume kombucha all day long, and even in the night when they're sleeping. So yeah, so you put all those costs, but I would say phase 1 is we're going to do this, and we're going to do this for 2 years until we build up enough retained earnings and stuff so that we're going to fund the tap room, and by then we think we'll have 1,000 customers or 500 customers or 250 customers. And those customers, then we're going to drive to this tap room. We'll have enough business to support the tap room. And at that point, in 2 years, your costs may not all be at the front end. Then we're going to have another staged cost thing. And at that point, then we're going to do the tap room. And so in year 2, you can see the second investment thing, that's going to be for 500 grand, where this is just 10 grand now. We're keeping our keeping our costs as low as possible to just keep everything variable and really do customer discovery, customer validation, product market fit, get that all together before we think about scaling. Because in your case, a tap room would be a scaling thing, scaling it up. And how can you sell online? How can you you take an order and you put it in the mail or something, or have a delivery truck or something that where people can just, or give it to FedEx or UPS or something like that. So that's how you're going to get your costs and all and do it. So then here we got our summary sheet, right? So we have our net income, all this kind of good stuff. We have this first year here, right? And I could put it up top or down here. I'm going to put it down here. And I'm going to call this our startup costs.
Is that clear? Much better? Outside? Okay.
So now what we do is the beauty of Excel is you have this sort of, it's a three-dimensional thing, right? You have this two-dimensional horizontal vertical thing, but you have a third dimension, which is all of these different sheets that you can do, right? So now we're just going to pull a number from that other sheet, right? I just did an equal sign. I go to that other sheet. I'm going to go over here and grab that total, hit enter, and it's over on this sheet. So now I don't have all those other numbers. If anybody wants to see them, I have them there to go into detail, but you just have this number. It's 272 grand. And you know, you might even just go over here and, because you know these numbers are kind of squirrely, what I would do is just say over here, you know, these numbers are uncertain. Contingency, right? And a contingency is just an extra bit of money. And I would just round this, say, I'm just going to round this to 300 grand and then back out that contingency number, you know? So you see what I'm doing? I'm just going to go here, go down here, subtract that from that number. What happened here? Did I do that right?
You put 3 million instead of 2.
Oh, that's what I did wrong. You're right. Thank you. Let's see here. Let's just take out one of these zeros here. I added too many zeros. And then that's the contingency. I just plugged for the contingency number to make this a round number. So instead of taking it from this guy, right? I'm now going to redo that and take it from this guy. And that's like a better number because you know there's going to be some other costs. You know, you got to pay off some building inspector and, you know, whatever else you have to do to get your stuff going on. You know, grease a couple of palms. It's you know, green grease makes the world go round, you know, as the mob always says. So you got to be able to pay off people. No, I'm just kidding, but yeah. So having a little extra, you know, slush fund there, you never know. You know, you may have to buy more stuff than you think because as you're planning very well, but there's going to be something out here that you didn't plan for, you know, and so you want to have a little bit extra money because you don't want to run out of money, right? So okay, so now let's go here and let's do our. Oh, yep. Let's do revenues. Revenues, okay. And it's going to be the same kind of thing, right? We're going to do, and I mean, now you know the drill, right? I mean, it's just basically the same thing. So here, I would suggest doing the revenues by month for the first year. Because that's really where, I mean, really, you should even break it down by week. I just went through a startup accelerator called Y Combinator. Every week we had to do a really detailed, you know, progress report. Every week, you know, how much did you grow? What's the percentage growth? How much was your revenues grow? How much did your, you know, all that kind of stuff. It's like, oh my God. So you could even break this down weekly, you know. I always like to say, Boeing, right? They build airplanes, and you can imagine how they have 5-year project plans, and they break those project plans down into daily progress, daily, for 5 years. So every day they have to hit their daily milestones. I mean, that's the way you really should be thinking about it. I mean, break it down. If you have something you're going to do, in 6 months, I want to have, you know, this running up and running. Make a daily plan. Okay, really? 6 months? Okay, that's, you know, 6 times 30 is whatever it is. What is 6 times 30? 180. So you have 180 little squares, and if I do this day, I have to do that the next day. And then you get to that point, and then you can check off. I did what I had to do every day. Because there is no such thing as long-term progress without short-term progress. And so you really have to keep yourself on a tight schedule. And then you can see, is that realistic? You know, well, maybe I have to do it in 8 months or a year because 6 months, you know, is a fantasy that I'm just not going to be able to do. So there's year 1. I'll put the 1 there. How about that? Year 1, and then year 2, and then these then will just go to yearly, right? And you can do 5-year projections. I would maybe just do 3 years. I mean, you could do 5 years, but really you're pulling numbers out of the air when you start thinking about the further out you go, right? And is it really realistic? These numbers should be pretty darn realistic, you know? And the other thing, if you're gonna go and really try to raise money from somebody and say, all I need is 300 grand to do this, and here's my projections, you're gonna be signing contracts and stuff, and they are gonna be on you so much. And if you're not meeting those numbers, they'll take the company away from you. They'll just take it away from you. That's why they call it vulture capital. It's not venture capital, right? That, a lot of them, that's their business plan, quite honestly, is let's go find some good businesses, make that naive person commit to unrealistic goals, and if they don't meet those goals, we get more and more equity until we finally just take the company away from them. That's their business model. So be careful. The best way to do it is to bootstrap it, do it on your own, don't go after money, win a couple of contests, use that money, and conserve that money like it's the only thing you have, because you know that's your dry powder. That's the stuff that you really need. And don't spend it until you know you have product market fit, and then you can start to scale. Don't do any advertising. Even at the end of the day, I'd argue, try to make a model where you don't do any advertising. Everything is word of mouth. Everything is customers telling other customers how great you are. Everything is social media that's free, and don't do any advertising. Unless you get to a place where you really have something that you can scale, and you know that if you put in $1, you're going to get $3 out, then you can start cranking that machine. But until then, and I would argue that you know if you do it right, you'll never get to that place that you can do it all by word of mouth. What are the 3 top search engines?
Google.
Google's number 1. What's number 2?
Being.
YouTube.
Oh, wow.
YouTube is the 2nd biggest search engine in the world. Who owns YouTube? Google. What's the 3rd? Amazon. Amazon is the 3rd largest search engine in the world. Amazon is essentially a search engine with a warehouse bolted on. So you can use all those ecosystems to your advantage, and you know,
So now, how do
that's
you,
good points.
How do you forecast your revenue? Like, how do you get like?
That's where you gotta, Google is your best friend. You know, it used to be for market research, it's all market research basically. You know, you're forecasting your revenue based on what you think you're gonna be able to charge. It's how much you think you're gonna be able to charge a price, and then the quantity. So it's all about basically start with any keywords about what you're doing, and just Google and Google and Google, and just sit there, and then as you read something, you'll find some more words and it'll lead you to places where then you can see how many people there might be available. You want to do it, there's 2 ways of doing forecasting, modeling your revenues from the market. And one is top down, right, where you say, okay, here's this market, how many people are buying cups of coffee every day? Oh, okay, in Albuquerque, that's a, you know, $500 million a year market. What, these giant numbers, right? That's what people usually say. I said, this is a $10 billion market, and I intend to capture 1% in the first year, 2% in the second, and okay, that's great, but there's no plan there. It's just like numbers abstracted from some big pie chart. And is that really an addressable market? You want to think about your addressable, how many people can you actually contact through your channels, your email channel, your social media, those kind of things, in person, you know, and that's your addressable market, and it's much smaller than the overall market. But you can say this is a mature market, it's popular, everybody goes to Starbucks, you know, most people, you know, buy 2 cups of coffee a day or whatever, and you can, have you been down and have you talked to Michael Thomas, and have you talked to the people at Zendo and the people at Humble, actually sat in there and watched who comes in, how many cups of coffee they go buy in an hour, and start modeling that up? That's what you call bottom up, where you can actually go and see how many people, and then go to those places and talk to them and say, I'm doing starting a business and thinking about this. I'm a student, say I'm doing research, and how many times do you usually come into Michael Thomas? Oh, I come in here 3 times a week. How many, when do you usually come in? Oh, I buy this much. And then you start to get your it's basically a lot. It's like detective work, right? You got to. So it would be two things: going online and doing a lot of just Google searches. It used to be you'd have to go to the library, look for books on market research information. You don't have to do that anymore. Just Google in, search all kinds of keywords about what you're doing, and then go and sit in those places, and you have a great, and talk to the people that own those places, talk to the people that are the baristas, talk to the customers, and find out, get every detail you can about your business. Simple, right? It's simple. That doesn't mean it's easy. It's a lot of work, And then you have to decide, am I willing to spend 5 hours a day for a month, or this, I would do it this week. If you're going to talk to present on Friday, I'd get in those coffee shops for at least an hour or two a day talking to customers. And first I'd read that Talking to Humans book, so I can go in and do that qualitative research, come up with a set of questions that you're going to ask. Just sit down, can I buy you a cup of coffee? And you mind if I ask you 10 questions or something? I'll pay for your cup of coffee. So you might have a budget of $50 to go do your market research, where you're paying for 10 people's cups of coffee, and then you can come in and say, I've gone into these shops, I've talked to this amount of people, 30% do this, 25% do that. These people buy a lot, and these people go to just one shop, and they don't really care about going to other shops, but I could give them deals on that particular shop to get them in more and convince the owners, and ask the owners, are they interested in this model at all? What do they think? How would this model work for them? What are their problems? What pain points do they have that you can solve for them? They're not going to do it out of the kindness of their heart. You got to show them you're going to make them money, a lot of money. Some business is going to come in, and how are you going to bring in new customers, and how are you going to amp up their existing customers to make them more money? Simple as that. But I would go talk to those guys this afternoon. I wouldn't wait. This isn't something to wait on, because you're going to be telling people hopefully an interesting story next Friday, and you don't want it to be in your mind. If it's in your mind, it's just delusional. You haven't talked to anybody. You have to get out of the building and talk to people. Get away from writing stuff. And these projections, you can make these numbers say anything you want, right? So it's not enough revenue. Just put in a number that's twice as big, right? Just like architects say, if it doesn't fit, draw it smaller. It doesn't work that way, though, right? You actually have to go out and talk to people. You have to get out of the building, and you have to be brave, and you have to actually feel comfortable talking to people. And first thing I would do is read that Talking to Humans book. It's a great way to understand how to get that qualitative research going. Get out there and do it. And then that way, when you're talking to people next Friday, you're not just saying, this is my dream, and I think this is going to happen, it's really going to be lovely. It's like, I've talked to people I know, and you know what? It's all about, there's two things. You either pivot or you iterate, right? Your idea right now, pretty good idea, but your idea is not matching up with anybody because you haven't talked to anybody. And then you have to go and say, well, as you talk to them, iterations are small changes. They may say, you know what? That sounds great, but my real problem is, whoever the coffee guy is, I need to sell more of this, the pounds of roast instead of the cups of coffee, or I need to sell this instead of that. Okay, then you're going to dial in you might change your vision a little bit. Pivoting is when you go, you know what? The coffee shops, that's not a good business. I'm going to go in to do something with the bakeries or something like that. That's where the business is. Same model, different market. Might turn out to be that kind of thing. It's like, you know what? Automotive shops really need this. Detailing shops, not the coffee shops. You may discover something like that. And the only way you're going to discover that is if you go out and talk to people and find out, are they willing to do this? Are you willing to give up 10 free cups of coffee? Or, how are you going to pay the shop owners?
I'll have to figure that out.
Better figure it out now. What are they? You're going to go into Michael Thomas and say, hey, I got this great idea. I need 1,000, free cups of your coffee so I can get these people to give me $10 a month. How does that sound to you? That's not going to sound so compelling to them, right? You have to be able to give them money. They're your customers, and then the people that are coming in are your customers too. And you have to create value propositions for both of those people that are really compelling enough for them to say, that sounds great, I'm going to do this. Yeah, so then with the revenues, I just made a little revenue thing here, and I just made 3 different revenue sources, right? You might have, different things. You might be selling memberships. You might turn out making your own, deal with a roaster and branding your own coffee or something too. And the memberships are just a part of it, and you're actually selling, your own blend, and that might be something else. You want to figure out different ways to make money, right? And then now I'm just going to go over here and take all of these numbers, right, and summarize those for the year. So that looks pretty good, huh? Going to make 275 grand in the first year. That's pretty good. And then let's just say we'd go through and make some type of increases here, maybe, right? And then, but let's see, I think, because those are adding up. I'm going to just go here and do this, and just go back and grab that number, and then go down. I'm just going to make all these numbers kind of the same. So another thing you can do is you can keep the numbers like this, but like I did, I made that mistake because I didn't see 3 million from 300,000. Might be nice to put in, put it in dollars with some commas, and then just take out the decimals. So you can have it like that. So now we have it for all those 5 years, right? The revenues. So I'm going to come back over to this thing here, and I'm going to go to revenue. And I did that wrong. I did that very wrong. But the thing is, make it fun to go talk to customers. It's not an intimidating thing. It should be just like fun. See, I thought it was making 275,000. It was making 27 grand. So now, once we have that first one in there, I can just go and drag that here, and it'll drag each of the next years, and it'll say V12, U12. Those are the numbers over there. So this is telling me it's going to cost 300 grand to make this thing, and I'm going to be making $27,000 a year. That's not a very good business, right? So right off the bat, we're going to have to amp up these numbers if we're going to make it make sense. And then we're going to have a sheet that's called expenses, right? And what I'm going to do, just to make it simple, I'm just going to copy the revenue sheet. There we go. I just call this expenses. And I'm going to change these guys here to say different things. I'm going to put salaries, and that would probably be a whole sheet of its own, right? You might have 12 employees, whatever. Supplies and rent. I mean, you're going to have a whole bunch of different ones, right? But that's one of the big things in startup things is what they say: get out of the building. Don't just write a business plan. That's what people used to do, write a plan, and this is what I'm going to do, and here's how much is going to, and then they never talk to customers, and then they'd raise money or start something and spend a bunch of money, and then realize, oh my God, nobody wants what I want because I haven't been out talking to anybody. So that whole thing is about get out of the building and talk to folks. So in this case, I'm going to make this guy go all the way out there. And this guy I'm going to change to 400. What the heck? I'm just coming up with numbers for now. You know, these are the line items and the actual numbers you can, you know, fill in for your business, right? So now we have this as expenses, and we have the first month and then the year. And right now these are flat, right? They're not going up each year, but expenses, right, are going to creep up, and they may go up faster. You might have salaries. You know, if you're growing, you're going to be hiring more people, and so those numbers might go up. But they're only going to go up as a percentage of revenues, right? They shouldn't go up higher than revenues. You want to keep them lower than revenues, like we talked about up there. Only hire the next person when you absolutely have to, when you just can't do the work anymore. And do as much as you can, as cheaply as you can. Find out ways to do stuff. Another thing is that people always say, well, if I just had $1 million, I could start this company. That's not really a plan. You know, you want to be able to say, what can I do with what I have right now, where I am right now, right? So now I'm going to take this number minus this number, and that's going to be my net income, right? So as we can see, it wouldn't make sense to spend 300 grand to make that amount each month. So one thing I'm going to quickly do, and we could go through present value and pulling these numbers back to everybody at finance and know about present value and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just going to quickly say, okay, they call it the net present value formula, but it's only a present value formula, right? I'm going to do this fast I usually build it up from scratch, but we can just do it this way. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go to formulas, and I'm going to go to financial, and I'm going to go to NPV. NPV, right? And that comes up with a formula. And I'm just going to pick an interest rate for now, 0.2, like 20%, right? And then the value stream that I want to do present value on is going to be these guys. And then it's going to hit that, and I'm going to hit OK. And that tells me it's 24 grand. So, oh, and it's 30 grand to do this. So I'm sorry. So it's not 300 grand. So this isn't too bad. What I'm going to do here is take out those decimals, right? So and then I'm going to make this into a number 2. Boop. Take out the decimals. So we're not that far off, huh? It's like 30 grand to make a present value at 20% discount rate of 24. We want to make that a lot bigger. So now I'm just going to amp up the revenues a little bit. There's 2 ways to increase net income. And what are they? Right, exactly. You can increase revenues or you can reduce expenses. So, we could dial in either of those, but you guys got it. So, but I'm just going to come in here and say, oh, what the heck? We're going to start making 2,000 there. Now, obviously, with your business, you're not just going to go and make the numbers fit, right? You really want to have some numbers. So, but I did that, right? I made that change. That change gets pulled through all these numbers, right? I can just go back to the summary sheet, and it just changes it. So now it's a present value of $50,000, $51,000 for a cost of 30 grand. That starts to look more, you know, making twice my money or something like that. And then I might go back and reduce my expenses and look at my startup costs. Do I really have to, start sharpening my pencil, start reducing those kind of things? But then you come up with a set of financials where you have your cost modeled, right? You got your costs modeled here. We went through and did that, what the costs are to get this thing up and running. Your revenues modeled based on, and each one of these, this is just a number here, right? You would have another sheet that would say, this is 10 people at $10 a person, and this is 14 people at $3.50 a person, whatever it is, and all that would add up to those numbers, right? So not just pulling numbers out of the air. You're going to do it from the bottom up, right? Bottom up kind of modeling, where you're looking at everything and saying, okay, here's the size of the market, and then you can see, is my bottom up, makes sense for the market? Is my bottom up things, 3 times the market now? Well, then it's not going to work, right? But if it's just like a small fraction of the market, it's like, hey, I might be able to convince those people that are already in the market to buy my thing. And really what you want to do is you want to niche down, right? You want to just address a very, very tiny, portion of some market. And you can start to think about what that is. Are there certain niches within the kombucha market? Are there certain niches within the coffee market? And there are. I mean, you've already decided that there's the Starbucks people versus the more, people that want a different experience than Starbucks all the time. Starbucks is good because it's uniform, but that doesn't necessarily make it good. And like I said, people start to trust brands outside of that, just like people started to trust the brewery, the home, the microbrews, instead of, it used to be everybody wanted that uniform beer. Everybody wanted Budweiser because it tasted the same if you bought a case here, if you bought a case in Kansas or whatever. Now people want the opposite. They want something that's where flavor is kind of king. So what do you think?
How does QuickBooks
fit into the equation? QuickBooks is an accounting software. So QuickBooks is the retrospective stuff, the stuff in the past. So QuickBooks is a great way to start doing your accounting, keep your accounting records. At first, you can pretty much do that even just with a checkbook on a cash basis, but once you start to allow people to maybe take their kombucha and pay on a monthly fee or something like that, you're going to have accounts receivable, accounts payable. Then you're going to want to go to a accounting software, and QuickBooks is a great choice. So then once you start getting those accounting records, then really what you want to do is you have your monthly sales and your monthly expenses and for the year, and that's going to be your budget, right? And say, this is what I think I'm going to do. And then each month as you do your QuickBooks accounting, that's going to be your actuals, what you actually did in that month. And then you compare your actuals to your budget, your projections, and any variances, any differences, they call them variances, and you go through and say, where was I over and under and why?
Yeah, this is super helpful because Josh and